Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam's Halacha in Hilchas Tamidim Umusafim Perik Beis Halacha Yud. The Rambam says as follows: Haramas Hadeshen Mi'al HaMizbeach B'chol Yom Mitzvah Saseh. The removal of the ashes, the uplifting of the ashes off the Mizbeach is a positive commandment every day. And he brings the pasuk Shenamar V'Herim Hadeshen. Torah says you shall raise up the ashes. And then he adds V'hi Aveda Me'avedas HaKahuna. It's one of the services that are given over to the priesthood. Then he says Ubigdei Kahuna Sheterim Behen Hadeshen Yu Pchusim Min HaBegadim Shemishamash Behem B'Shar Avedas. The priestly garments that he wears while he's removing the ashes shall be inferior to the garments that he uses when he performs the other functions, the other avodas of the Beis Hamikdash. And he brings the pasuk, Shenemar Apashad as Begadov. He removes his garments, V'labash Begadim Acherim, and he puts on other garments, V'Herim Esadeshin, and then he lifts up the ashes. Eina Eimer Acherim Sheyu Bigdecheh. When he says other garments, he doesn't mean they're weekday garments, non-holy garments. Ella, they're priestly garments. They're holy. Ella sheyu pchusim in harishainim. They're inferior to the first garments, the garments that he wears when he does the other avodas. And the Rambam explains the reason for it. It's not proper comportment that a person who's serving his master shall serve him the wine, the cup of wine, that he should wear the same garments that he's wearing when he cooks for his master. While they're both performing a service for the master, one is pouring the wine, diluting and pouring the wine, and one is cooking, but the cooking requires an inferior set of clothing. So the Kesef Mishnah on this Rambam asks the question that if you look in the pasuk, the words, B'labash Begadim Acherim, you should put on other garments, are followed by V'haitzias Hadeshen. He shall take out the deshen, take out the ashes. Why? Because there are actually two separate functions, it seems. There's one function, V'heirim Hadeshen. You take up some of the ashes, a handful of ashes, and V'sama Yetzel Mizbeach. The Torah says you put it near the Mizbeach. Then, when the ashes accumulate, you take out all the ashes, and you bring it to a faraway place, and you leave it there. There's this Haramas Hadeshen and there's Haitzoas Hadeshen. And the Torah talks about wearing other garments, it refers to it by Haitzoas Hadeshen. So you see from this Rambam, however we're going to explain it, that the Rambam considers these two mitzvahs to be one, that whatever it says about Haramas Hadeshen, Haitzoas Hadeshen applies to Haramas Hadeshen. At least it seems that way. And it's interesting that Rashi explains that the reason why you have to wear different garments because you don't want to get soiled. That applies to Haitzah Hadeshen, taking the ashes out. When you're taking a whole load of ashes, it's very easily able to soil the garments. So we have to wear different garments. Can't wear the same priestly garments. It wouldn't be respectful to them to get them dirty. But when you just take a handful of ashes from the Mizbeach and put it next to the Mizbeach, that doesn't require separate garments. But the Rambam doesn't seem to make that distinction because the Rambam's opinion is that it's a matter of dignity, that you don't use the same garments for two different levels of Avodah, not because of the danger of it getting soiled. But anyhow, at any rate, we see that the Rambam considers to these two mitzvahs, the Haramas Hadeshen and Haitzah Hadeshen, to be two parts of one mitzvah. And in fact, they're only counted as one mitzvah. We also found another Rambam. In the end of Halacha Tezvav, the Rambam says, when you take the ashes outside of the city, we're talking about not the original handful, but we're talking about all the accumulated ashes, which, by the way, the Rambam holds that those were taken out every single day, not just when they accumulate after a long period of time. But so what we do with those ashes, take it to a place where the winds don't blow very strongly. No pigs will, go into these ashes. You shouldn't let it scatter there. It should be placed in one place. You put it down very peacefully. Then he says, you're not allowed to benefit from those ashes. So the Rabbi, in his criticism, says, no, that's only said about the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin, removing the ashes and putting it next to the Mizbeach. So the law of Me'ilah, of not being allowed to benefit from something that's holy, only applies to the ashes that were put near the Mizbeach, but not the ashes that were taken out. So what do we see from the Rambam? The Rambam holds that there's only one din. There's only one halacha that applies to both Harama Sadesh and Eitzah Sadesh. The Rambam consolidates the two. This explains why the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs writes that the mitzvah is lahasir hadeshin instead of laharim hadeshin. All these different places, the lashon is laharim hadeshin, to uplift the deshin. Usually the word laharim is used in the context of truma, separating something from something else. So the mitzvah of harama sadeshin is you're not really removing all the ashes, you're only taking a handful and you're separating it from the other ashes. But the Rambam doesn't use that language in Sefer HaMitzvahs. He uses the language lahasir hadeshin, to remove it. So one could say, but the Rambam didn't write Sefer HaMitzvahs in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. He wrote it in Arabic, and it was translated. Maybe the translation is not so accurate. But the Chinuch clearly uses, which was written in Lashon HaKodesh, clearly uses the language lahasir, to remove it. So what does the Rambam mean by that when he says lahasir instead of laharim? What does the Chinuch mean by that? So it seems that they're trying to say is that both mitzvahs, harama sadeshin, heitzah sadeshin, are all essentially one geder, one concept. The concept is removing it from the mizbeach. And if you look in the language of the Chinuch writes, what's the reason? The Chinuch always gives the reasons for the mitzvahs. Lahagdil kavod habayis, lahadre b'chol yecholte. It's to increase, to enhance the honor that you give to the Beis HaMikdash and to bring beauty in every way possible. And therefore, he says, it's more beautiful to remove the ashes. In fact, from a place where you want to light the fire, it's nicer to have the ashes removed from there. It's cleaner to have the ashes removed. And furthermore, fire burns better when there are no ashes there. So what he's saying over here is that the mitzvah is to remove it from the mizbeach. That's the geder of the mitzvah, and that applies to both the kaimitz, the handful that you take and you put next to the mizbeach, as well as the remainder of the ashes, the bulk of ashes that you take out of the city. In both cases, the concept is equal. You're removing the ashes. So now there's another question. If we see that the Rambam holds that the two parts of this mitzvah are really two parts of one mitzvah, they're not separate mitzvahs with separate gedarim, and that's why the priestly garments that are worn have to be an inferior quality in both cases. And that's why the law of Me'ilah, of not being allowed to have any hana, any benefit from the ashes, applies to both equally. But then the Rambam in Halacha Tezvav says that while taking the harama sadeshin is an avodah, heitzah sadeshin is not an avodah. If they're both the same geder, to remove it from the mizbeach, why is one considered an avodah and one is not an avodah? So it could be the explanation is as follows. According to the Gemara and Yuma, and the Halacha is like that, if a non-Kohen who does an avodah, he could be chayiv misa, but not for removing the ashes. Why? Because it's called avodah siluk. What's avodah siluk? Avodah siluk is an avodah where you're removing something as opposed to giving something. All other avodas, you're taking the blood and you're sprinkling it. You're taking the animal and you're slaughtering it and bringing it closer to the mizbeach. But when you're talking about removing ashes, it's siluk. And the one way of understanding that is that it's deficient in its status as an avodah. It's not as significant. Giving something is more significant than taking away something. So even though the taking away is also, in a sense, giving, you're enhancing the glory of the Beis HaMikdash, but it's indirectly. Directly, you're removing. So it's lesser of an avodah. It's a more inferior avodah. But nevertheless, it's still considered an avodah. It's just it's an avodah that doesn't have a chiyuv misa for a zar, for a non-kohen. But then Trumas Hadeshin is still considered an avodah. Why is it an avodah altogether? So Tosfos in Yuma explains that the siluk, when you're removing the ashes, you're removing it from the mizbeach. It's connected to the mizbeach. And a zar, a non-kohen, and a balmum are not allowed to go close to the mizbeach. So in other words, the mere fact that it's connected to the mizbeach accords it the status of an avodah. It's not an avodah where there's a chiyuv misa, because it's avodah siluk, it's inferior to avodas matana, but nevertheless, it's still considered an avodah in a limited sense because you're removing it from the mizbeach. It's connected to the mizbeach. And a zar cannot go close to the mizbeach. And the fact that a zar cannot do it, that makes it less of an avodah. When the Gemara and Zvachim and other places say that shchita lav avodahi, so there were two explanations. One of the explanations Rashi gives is because a zar is allowed to do the shchita. That means the fact that the Torah allows a zar to do the shchita renders it less of an avodah. It's not an avodah for which there's a chiyuv misa. It's an avodah, but there's no chiyuv misa because it's something that a zar can do. The fact that a zar cannot do the Trumas Hadeshin gives it an inferior status of avodah. If it wouldn't be avodah siluk, it would be a full-fledged avodah. Because it's avodah siluk and it's connected to the mizbeach, it's an inferior form of avodah. Now we can understand the difference between the Trumas Hadeshin, Hitzos Hadeshin, even according to the Rambam that holds it, it's one inyan of siluk. But when you're the Trumas Hadeshin, you're removing it from the mizbeach, and v'samay eitzel mizbeach. It's connected to the mizbeach, and since it's connected to the mizbeach, it's something that a zar cannot do. Therefore, it's an avodah. It's an inferior avodah. You're not chayiv misa, but it's an avodah because it's connected to the mizbeach. Hitzos Hadeshin, where the Rambam says it's after you removed it from the mizbeach and put it down, then you remove it from the place where it's no longer connected to the mizbeach. Therefore, it has both deficiencies. Number one, it's avodah siluk. It's a removal avodah, not a giving avodah. And number two, it's not connected to the mizbeach. If it's not connected to the mizbeach, then there is no status of avodah whatsoever. There's still some remaining questions, but we'll have to leave that for another time, Yimir Hashem.